So then that brings me to the question, obviously, is should the Bible be read literally or metaphorically? Because if it literally does state that, like in Deuteronomy, that Adam or Abraham should kill all the Canaanites and everyone, Revelations, of course, that everyone's going to be killed, Sodom and Gomorrah. So should that be taken metaphorically, or is the Old Testament and the violent acts of the New Testament sort of more of a teaching tool than an actual...
Well, I don't believe you can ever teach anybody the truth with violence or threats of violence. So I don't believe it was a teaching tool. I believe what happened with the Bible is this. There are some things in the Bible which are very loving in their concepts, and many of the things that it's recorded that I said in the first century were loving. Not all of them, of course, because there were inaccuracies in terms of what people could accept or believe. But the reality is the majority of the Bible cannot be God's word. And the reason why it cannot be God's word is quite simple, because it portrays a God who is wrathful and punishing. Anything that says that God is wrathful and punishing cannot be the truth, because that would make God worse than I am. And in my opinion, God has far more knowledge, power, wisdom and understanding than I do. So therefore, God would also be more loving than I am. And therefore, it was impossible for the Bible, for the God of the Bible to actually exist. I do believe God exists, but not the God of the Bible, not the wrathful, angry God who's punishing. Now, the way I feel to look at the Bible is quite simple. It doesn't really matter whether it's literal or not. What matters is what is loving coming from it or not. So what I would do if I was reading the Bible, and I read the Bible quite frequently still, and in the first century I read what most people would believe to be the Bible nowadays, the Old Testament and the prophets, and this is what I did when I read it. I look at it and I ask myself the question, is this concept loving? Just a simple question. Is this concept loving? And is this concept loving, or is this a concept of anger, a concept of wrath, a concept of rage, violence? Which one is it? Because if it's a loving concept, then I can accept it. If it's an unloving concept, then I must reject it. If I'm ever going to be a peaceful person myself and a person living in harmony with love myself, then I must reject it. And I believe that if we looked at the Bible or any other holy book, because this applies to the Quran and any other holy books on the planet, the same principle applies. If the principle being explained is loving, then let's retain the principle. If the principle being explained is unloving and wrathful, violent, then let's get rid of it, because it doesn't belong. It doesn't belong in our concept of God, and it doesn't belong in a peaceful, loving environment on the planet. It doesn't belong in international relations. It doesn't belong in our relationships with our friends, and it doesn't belong even in our relationships with our partner or with any other thing that we may live our life. If it's a concept that is wrathful, violent, and enraged and punishing, then it does not belong in our society at all. And to get to that point, I have to be willing to forgive what is wrong rather than try to punish what is wrong. Because if I try to punish what is wrong, I'm now also going through the same process myself. I'm now believing in a wrathful self as well as a wrathful God. And so I need to correct that. So I believe the way to deal with the issue is to firstly ask myself, with anything that I read, is this concept loving? Would I want this to be done to me if I was in that situation? Remember, that was the guideline that I placed in the first century. The guideline I placed in the first century was this understanding that whatever I would like you to do to me is what I would do to you.
Of course.
Not whatever happens to me I'll do to you, but whatever I would like you to do. So if what happens to me is you attack me, well, what I would like for you to do is to not attack me. And if I would like that, then surely that's what I should do to you, not attack you in return. And this is something that is a very basic Christian principle that hardly any Christian religions follow. All right? And in fact, I believe, in terms of Christian principles, I feel Gandhi was very right, when he said that your Jesus was, in a Christ-like state, in the sense of in a Christian state and in a loving state, but the religion that follows him is not, right? And the reality is there's many concepts in the Bible that are very basic like that. If you look at, for example, if you look at Matthew in the books of 5 to 7 of the books of Matthew, you will see over and over concept of rage and what or if people can't accept on Jesus, what Jesus' opinion of rage was, right? What Jesus' opinion of loving your enemy was, right? And what Jesus' opinion is of judging other people. They're all mentioned in those three books of the Bible, in those 3 chapters, in fact. Now, if you examine those particular things and then ask yourself, is the Christian religion faith, who basically is founded on the precepts of this man, does it follow those particular opinions? And the answer is no, it does not. It just does not, right across the board. Historically, for 2,000 years it has not, and it still does not follow those particular principles. Now, if it did, the whole Christian religion would be much more peaceful and much more loving, and therefore very, very much not be an influence in world affairs when it comes to war or violence. However, because there is this justification of violence by going back to the Old Testament and the way that Jews interacted with the Gentiles and so forth, there is this justification of violence. Once this justification of violence begins, now Christians are willing to justify violence towards people of other religious faiths or under certain conditions of being attacked, for example. This is completely out of harmony with love. And this is what I say, if every single religion on the planet thought about what is harmonious with love, and then changed their religious belief systems so that any religious belief system that was out of harmony with love was discarded, then we would be in a much better place on this planet when it comes to religious violence. Wouldn't we?
We would. Very different place.
Yeah.
But that brings up a very big question of, well, then how do we go about this? What steps do we take?
Well, if you examine religions on the planet, you've got some pretty major religions on the planet, haven't you? I think, through statistic, I think the Christian religious faiths, if you added them all together, they would number about 1.5 billion people on the planet who regularly practice the Christian faith. Then if you add together the Muslim faith, you've probably got another 1 to 1.5 billion people on the planet who practice that faith. And then if you add some of the other faiths that are less prevalent, you can see that a good half of the world's population probably has some kind of religious belief. Now, and even more probably. Now, if you examine all of that and go, okay, let's collectively get all of those the leaders of all these religious faiths together, and present to them the principle that if the principle inside of their faith is loving, then they retain the belief. So if it's just an issue with regard to some kind of, what you would call, what do you call it, sort of like a, ritual, some kind of ritual, and it's not out of harmony with love, then why not keep it? There's no harm in it, there's no harm in retaining certain rituals if they're completely in harmony with love. But as soon as it's out of harmony with love, we get rid of it. We say that cannot any longer be a part of our religious faith. Right? Now, if every religion agreed to do that, already you would have the leaders of nearly, half of the world's population coming into more harmony with love. Now, if the people who followed them were willing to make the same change, then we could potentially have quite a lot of large change on the planet in a very short period of time. The problem is, though, most religious leaders are not willing to do that. Most religious leaders would like instead to make every other religion theirs. In other words, to convert the people of other religions to their faith. because they cannot cope emotionally with having somebody with a different belief. Right? And this is a problem. We need to be able to emotionally cope with different beliefs on the planet, even if they are not what we agree with, as long as those belief systems are completely in harmony with love. If the belief system is in harmony with love, now we have some means of a uniting force. And even though we may disagree with the underlying terminology, or disagree with some underlying principles that we're still in discovery of, at least if we all agreed that we were all going to act lovingly, and we were all going to be non-violent, and we were all going to be pacifist in our nature when it comes to violence, then all of a sudden all religious sectarian violence would cease. Now, I feel today a lot of people use something like that, like some kind of religious change, as a means to attack and be violent. So they use it as a justification. So for example, if a person in a fundamental Christian faith had to throw away belief systems that are unloving in their nature, then he would have to throw away quite a lot of belief systems, actually, if he thinks about it. For example, is it loving for one person to pay a sacrifice for billions of people? Probably not, right?
No.
So there goes the belief that Jesus died for my sins. Out the window. Right? Now, most Christians would have a huge problem with that belief going out the window.
They would.
Right? Because they believe that is the fundamental principle of their own faith. But that belief in itself is unloving. Because it is not... Like if I made you pay for something that I did, would you feel that was unfair?
Of course. I wouldn't feel it was very loving.
So what do you think Jesus feels about the idea?
Not very good.
Surely he would feel it was unloving too. Mm-hmm. Now, and perhaps God has other laws. God has other principles that every single person is responsible for their own actions. Is that a loving law? That every single person is responsible for their own action. Now surely that is a loving law in comparison to Jesus is responsible for all of my unloving actions. You know, that's not a very loving law. So if we examine the principles in the religious faith, we would see that if we were truly honest about the goals of love, which Jesus was, by the way, and I'm referring to Jesus now as if, not myself, just so that most of your audience can cope with that. When I was on earth, though, you know, I never portrayed any religious faith as being better than another. I always talked about the principles of love. It's the principles of love that should guide any religious faith. And if every religious faith absorbed the principles of love, they could retain anything else they wish to retain. But if they absorbed the principles of love, then they would rapidly change and also possibly cause rapid change on the planet in terms of how much violence was happening on the planet in particular. Now, of course, there will be fundamentalists who disagree with those particular actions, but surely they would not be you would hope they would not be the mainstay of the whole movement. The reason why is because the majority of people on the planet do want peace. They do want there to be a loving environment for them to grow up in. They do want their children to survive. They do want things to be prosperous on the planet. War does not cause prosperity except for the nations who go to war. You know, for the nations who are involved in the war, it causes terrible, terrible degradation to those nations. And, you know, if you look at, for example, with the United States, you know, 1/3 of its entire economy is based around war, or the production of arms. And if we asked ourselves as a society, is that a loving place? It's quite obvious the answer. Of course it's not loving to produce arms that then get distributed all over the world and they're all killing people. That's what they're made for. Now, that's not a loving environment, that's not a loving place. So let's stop those industries and turn them into something that does good for mankind. That's 1/3 of the United States economy, though. Is everyone in the United States willing to do that? Lose 1/3 of their economy for the sake of peace? You know, probably not, possibly not. But maybe yes. You know, maybe they are sick and tired of this whole cycle of violence. You know, it's been going on now for millennia, And maybe the majority of people on the planet are starting to get sick and tired of having violent act after violent act perpetrated, one towards the other and then the other back towards the origin. And surely all of us are starting to see the underlying pointlessness of it all. And I feel, you know, once people are presented with those particular underlying facts, then things can change. Things can change on the planet. So it requires, though, the hearts of individuals change. And for the hearts of individuals to change, they're going to have to change away from a selfish attitude into a more peaceful attitude. They're going to have to change from a desire towards violence to a desire towards peace. And what I mean by that is, when most people on earth are wronged, you know, they're hurt in some way, even if it's only emotionally, most people become angry and violent. That has to change. We have to allow ourselves to feel our hurt, but we have to change in the way that we react to our hurt. We have to forgive. We have to learn what forgiveness is all about. You know, we need to learn how to forgive people who have acted harmfully towards us. It doesn't mean that we'd continue to put up with their behaviour all the time. And collectively as a society, we don't have to if we all had the same law governing us.
Of course. Now you mentioned